My daughter called me worthless and locked me out of my own home. The sharp click of that door still haunts my dreams. Everything I thought I knew about family love died in that single moment. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning at 5:30, I wake to the sound of garbage trucks rumbling down 34th Avenue in Queens. The radiator clanks its familiar tune, and I wrap myself in the threadbare burgundy robe Harold bought me for our 20th anniversary. The fabric smells faintly of his cologne, even after all these years since he passed. I shuffle to the kitchen, my arthritic fingers gripping the counter as I make my coffee in the same chipped blue mug I've used for decades. The apartment feels enormous when you're alone. 3 bedrooms that once echoed with children's laughter now hold nothing but dust and memories. The walls are lined with photographs: Rachel's graduation from NYU, Tony's wedding day, grandchildren I barely recognize anymore. Each frame tells a story of love I thought was returned, of sacrifices I believed mattered. But on that cold February morning 6 months ago, as I sat stirring sugar into my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. Rachel's message was brief and brutal: family meeting tonight. 7 p.m. Don't be late. No warmth, no explanation, just a command. My hands trembled as I read those words over and over, searching for some hint of affection that simply wasn't there. I spent the entire day preparing. I baked Rachel's favorite apple pie from scratch, the same recipe my mother taught me 60 years ago. The kitchen filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and vanilla as I rolled the dough with wooden pins worn smooth by generations of women in my family. I ironed my best blouse, the navy one with tiny flowers that Harold always said brought out my eyes. I even put on lipstick, something I rarely did anymore. The subway ride to Rachel's house in Westchester felt longer than usual. I clutched my purse tightly, the pie balanced carefully on my lap, as the train swayed through tunnels I'd traveled countless times to visit my children. Other passengers stared at their phones, lost in their own worlds, while I watched my reflection in the dark window and practiced what I might say. Maybe Rachel wanted to plan something special for my birthday next month. Maybe she'd realized how distant we'd become and wanted to bridge that gap. But when I rang her doorbell at exactly 7 p.m., the woman who answered wasn't the daughter I remembered. Rachel stood in the doorway wearing an expensive black dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled, her expression cold as winter stone. She didn't smile. She didn't invite me in with a hug like she used to when the children were small. "You're on time for once," she said, stepping aside just enough for me to squeeze past. The house felt different too. The family photos that once lined the hallway had been replaced with abstract art I didn't understand. The warmth was gone, replaced by stark white walls and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a home. Tony was already there, sitting rigidly on the leather sofa with his wife Sandra. My grandchildren, Emma and Jake, were upstairs somewhere, their absence like a physical ache in my chest. I set the pie on the glass coffee table, watching as Rachel eyed it with something that looked almost like disgust. "We need to talk, Mom," Tony said, his voice carefully measured. He wore a gray suit that made him look like a stranger, like the successful Manhattan lawyer he'd become rather than the little boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. I settled into the armchair they'd positioned across from them, suddenly feeling like I was facing a tribunal rather than my own children. The room was silent except for the tick of an expensive clock on the mantel, each second stretching like an eternity. "It's about Dad's estate," Rachel began, pulling out a folder thick with legal documents. "We've been talking to lawyers, and there are some complications with the will." My heart started racing. Harold had been gone for 3 years, and I thought we'd settled everything long ago. He'd left me the Queen's apartment, a small savings account, and his father's pocket watch. Nothing complicated about it. "What kind of complications?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel and Tony exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. It was the same look they'd shared as teenagers when they'd broken something and were deciding who would tell me. "The Manhattan property," Sandra said suddenly, speaking for the first time. "The one Dad inherited from his uncle. It's worth more than anyone realized." I felt confused. Harold had never mentioned any Manhattan property. We'd lived paycheck to paycheck for most of our marriage, working double shifts to put these children through college, clipping coupons and saving every penny we could. If there had been valuable real estate, surely I would have known about it. "I don't understand," I said. "What Manhattan property?" "The building on the Upper East Side," Tony explained, his tone growing impatient. "Dad bought it in the 70s with money from his uncle's estate. It's been generating rental income for decades." The room started spinning. Rental income? For decades? I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to make sense of what they were telling me. Harold had always handled our finances, said it was too boring for me to worry about. He'd give me my household money each week, and I'd stretch it to cover groceries, utilities, and the children's needs. I never questioned where it came from. How much rental income? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Rachel pulled out a bank statement and slid it across the coffee table. The numbers swam before my eyes. $35,000. Per month. For 40 years. That can't be right, I whispered. We barely had enough to fix the car when it broke down. I worked at the deli until I was 70 to help make ends meet. Dad was very private about money, Tony said, and there was something in his voice that made me look up sharply. He wanted to make sure you were provided for, but he also wanted to ensure the family wealth was protected for future generations. Future generations. Not me. Not his wife of 48 years. Future generations. Where has this money been going? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Dad set up trusts for Rachel and me when we were in college, Tony explained. The rental income has been split between maintaining the property and funding our trust accounts. It was his way of ensuring we'd be financially stable. I felt something crack inside my chest. While I'd been standing on my feet for 12 hours a day, slicing pastrami and serving coffee to customers who barely looked at me, my own husband had been secretly funneling thousands of dollars to my children every month. While I'd been darning socks and shopping at thrift stores, my children had been living comfortable lives funded by money I didn't even know existed. How long have you known? I asked Rachel. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. Since college. Dad said it was important to understand financial responsibility early. Since college, I repeated. Rachel had graduated 26 years ago. 26 years of watching me struggle while sitting on a fortune. 26 years of accepting my meager gifts on their birthdays while they had access to more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The thing is, Mom, Rachel continued, her voice taking on a businesslike tone, the property needs some major renovations to maintain its value. And there are tax implications we need to consider. We think it might be best if you signed over your interest in the estate to us. We can manage everything more efficiently. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sign over my interest? It's for the best, Tony added quickly. You don't understand these kinds of financial complexities. We have lawyers and accountants who can handle everything properly. I stared at my children, these two people I'd carried in my womb, nursed through illnesses, comforted through heartbreaks, and sacrificed everything for. They sat there in their expensive clothes, in this house paid for by money I'd never known existed, asking me to give up my inheritance so they could manage it more efficiently. What would I live on? I asked. You have Social Security, Sandra said, as if that settled everything. And the Queen's apartment is paid off. Social Security. $863 a month. They expected me to live on $863 a month while they managed millions. I thought about all those years of packing Harold's lunch every morning, darning his work clothes, stretching our grocery budget to make sure there was enough food on the table. I thought about working at the deli even when my feet were so swollen I could barely stand, because Harold said we needed the extra income. I thought about all the times I'd wanted to take a vacation or go out to dinner, and Harold would shake his head sadly and say we couldn't afford it. Meanwhile, my children had been receiving thousands of dollars every month. I need time to think about this, I said, standing up slowly. Mom, Rachel's voice sharpened. This isn't really negotiable. The lawyers are expecting the paperwork by Monday. Expecting the paperwork? I repeated. You've already drawn up the papers? Tony pulled out another folder. It's just a formality. We're family. We'll take care of you. I looked at the legal documents with my name already typed in, signature lines highlighted in yellow. They'd planned this entire evening, choreographed every word. The apple pie sitting untouched on the coffee table suddenly seemed like such a foolish gesture. I said I need time to think. Rachel stood up, her expression hardening. Time to think about what? This is what's best for everyone. You don't have the knowledge or experience to handle this kind of wealth. It's my husband's legacy, I said, my voice growing stronger. It's my inheritance. Your inheritance? Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, let's be honest. What did you contribute to building this wealth? Dad worked 60-hour weeks while you stayed home. Dad made the investments while you clipped coupons. Dad built this legacy, and now it's our responsibility to protect it. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. What did I contribute? I'd contributed 48 years of marriage. I'd contributed raising their children while Harold worked those 60-hour weeks. I'd contributed every meal I'd cooked, every shirt I'd ironed, every midnight I'd stayed awake when they had fevers. I'd contributed my entire life. I'm leaving, I said quietly. Mom, be reasonable, Tony started, but I was already walking toward the door. Sign the papers, Mom, Rachel called after me. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I turned back to look at her one more time. This woman I'd given birth to, whose first word had been mama, whose scraped knees I'd kissed better, whose college tuition I'd worked extra shifts to help pay. She stood there in her designer dress, in her house paid for with my husband's hidden wealth, looking at me like I was an obstacle to be overcome. Take the pie, I said. It's your favorite. I don't eat sugar anymore, she replied coldly. I left the pie on the coffee table and walked out into the February night. The train ride back to Queens was a blur of tears and streetlights, and by the time I reached my apartment, I felt like a different person than the woman who'd left that morning with such hope in her heart. But that was just the beginning. The real nightmare started the next morning. I was awakened at 6 a.m. by my phone ringing. Rachel's voice was sharp and angry. Mom, we need to talk. Now. Rachel, I just woke up. Can we? No, we cannot wait. I'm coming over. She arrived 30 minutes later, still in her pajamas under a fur coat I'd never seen before. Her face was flushed with rage as she pushed past me into my small living room. You called Uncle Robert, she accused. Uncle Robert was Harold's younger brother, the only family Harold had left. We'd always been close, especially after Harold passed. He lived in Arizona now, retired and enjoying his golden years with his wife Margaret. I needed to ask him about the Manhattan property, I said. I needed to understand, you had no right. Rachel's voice rose to a shout. No right to drag family into this. Uncle Robert called Tony at midnight asking questions about Dad's will. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Embarrassing? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rachel, I didn't even know about this property. About any of this money. I have a right to understand my own husband's estate. You have a right to what we decide you have a right to, she snapped. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd loved unconditionally for 38 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger. What did you just say to me? You heard me. Dad left me and Tony in charge of the financial decisions for good reason. You don't understand business. You don't understand investments. You spent 40 years being a housewife while he built something substantial, and now you think you can waltz in and make demands. Each word felt like a slap. I wasn't just a housewife, Rachel. I was your mother. I was Harold's partner. I built a home while he built a business. A home? She looked around my modest apartment with disdain. This isn't a home, Mom. This is where poor people live. Dad and Tony and I built real wealth, real legacy. And I'll be damned if I let you destroy it with your ignorance. I felt my knees go weak. I sat down heavily in Harold's old armchair, the one I'd been begging Rachel to help me reupholster for months. The fabric was worn thin from 30 years of use, but it still smelled faintly of his aftershave. Harold never talked to me like that, I whispered. Harold protected you from reality, Rachel said, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. He knew you couldn't handle the complexity of real wealth. That's why he set up the trusts. That's why he made sure Tony and I understood the business from early on. He was preparing us to take care of things when he was gone. Take care of things, or take care of me? Rachel paused, and in that pause, I saw the truth. Same thing, she said finally. I understood then what my children really thought of me. Not as their mother, not as Harold's widow, not as a person with rights and feelings and dignity. I was a thing to be managed, a burden to be handled efficiently. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, get out of my house. Rachel's expression shifted from anger to something that might have been surprise. You can't be serious. I said get out. Fine, she snapped, pulling her coat tighter around her. But this conversation isn't over. We're not going to let you make a mess of Dad's legacy because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. After she left, I sat in Harold's chair for hours, staring at the wall of photographs that suddenly looked different to me. There we all were at Emma's baptism, at Jake's first communion, at family Christmas dinners and birthday parties and graduations. In every picture, I was smiling, my arms around my children and grandchildren, believing we were a family bound by love. But now I saw something else. In every picture, especially the recent ones, my children looked slightly uncomfortable when I hugged them. Their smiles seemed forced. Even the grandchildren, teenagers now, appeared to be tolerating my affection rather than returning it. How long had they seen me as a burden? How long had I been living in a fantasy while they planned my future without me? That afternoon, I called Uncle Robert back. Sweetheart, his warm voice came through the phone like a lifeline. I'm so sorry. I had no idea you didn't know about the property. Harold always said he'd told you everything. Robert, I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly did Harold leave me? There was a long pause. Margaret, honey, are you sitting down? My heart started pounding. Just tell me. The Manhattan building isn't the only property. Harold was he was very successful with his investments over the years. Much more successful than I think even he realized toward the end. How successful? Another pause. The last time we talked, maybe 6 months before he passed, he mentioned that his portfolio had grown to around $86 million. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. $86 million. While I'd been working at the deli into my 70s. While I'd been darning socks and shopping at thrift stores. While I'd been feeling guilty about spending $20 on a new winter coat. $86 million. I managed to pick up the phone with shaking hands. Robert? Are you still there? I'm here, sweetheart. Margaret, I think you need to get yourself a lawyer. A good one. And I don't think you should sign any papers until you understand exactly what Harold left for you. That evening, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. I called Tony. Mom, I hope you've had time to think about what Rachel discussed with you. I've been thinking, I said. And I've decided I want to see all the financial records. Everything. From the day your father died until now. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Mom, that's not necessary. We've been managing everything perfectly well. I'm sure you have. But I want to see the records anyway. That's not feasible. The financial structures are very complex. You wouldn't understand most of it. There it was again. The assumption that I was too stupid, too simple, too much of a burden to understand my own inheritance. Then explain it to me. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're trying to protect me from what, Tony? From my own money? It's not your money. The words exploded from him before he could stop them. It's family money. It's legacy money. It's meant to benefit everyone, not just. Not just what? Not just the wife who stood by your father for 48 years. You stood by him, Mom, but you didn't build what he built. You didn't make the sacrifices he made. The irony was so crushing I almost laughed. I didn't make sacrifices? I sacrificed my career to raise his children. I sacrificed my social life to care for his aging parents. I sacrificed my health working at the deli to help with expenses he apparently didn't need help with. I sacrificed my dreams, my interests, my independence to build the family that was now treating me like a stranger. I want to see the records, Tony. And I'm telling you that's not going to happen. The finality in his voice made something inside me snap. Fine. Then I'll get my own lawyer and find out what I'm entitled to legally. Mom, don't do this. Don't make us fight you. We're your children. We love you. But we won't let you destroy what Dad built. If you love me, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days, then you'll treat me with respect. You'll include me in decisions about my own husband's estate. You'll stop talking to me like I'm a child or an idiot. We'll think about it, Tony said, but his tone suggested no such thing. After I hung up, I realized I was alone in a way I'd never been before in my life. Even after Harold died, I'd had my children. Even when I was struggling financially, I'd believed my family cared about me. But now I understood that for years, maybe decades, I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion. My children didn't love me. They tolerated me. They managed me. And now that there was serious money at stake, they didn't even want to do that anymore. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed. The way Rachel always seemed busy when I called. The way Tony would check his watch during our brief visits. The way the grandchildren had stopped hugging me with any real enthusiasm. The way family gatherings had become fewer and briefer over the years. I'd attributed it to everyone being busy, to the natural way families drift apart as children become adults. But now I wondered if it was something else entirely. Had they been waiting for Harold to die? Had they been planning this for years? The next morning brought a knock at my door. I opened it to find a man in an expensive suit with a briefcase. Mrs. Margaret Walsh? I'm David Chen, attorney for Rachel and Anthony Walsh. I believe they've spoken to you about some estate matters that need to be resolved. He didn't wait for an invitation, just walked past me into my living room as if he owned the place. He set his briefcase on my coffee table and pulled out the same documents Rachel and Tony had shown me, plus several new ones. I understand you have some concerns about signing over your interest in the estate, he said smoothly. I'm here to address those concerns and help you understand why this arrangement is in everyone's best interest, including yours. I remained standing, making him look up at me from where he sat uninvited on my sofa. I haven't agreed to any arrangement, I said. Of course not. But I think once you understand the full picture, you'll see that your children are trying to protect you from some very serious financial liabilities. What liabilities? He opened one of the folders and spread out pages covered with numbers and legal language I couldn't begin to understand. The Manhattan property, for instance, is currently facing a lawsuit from former tenants claiming the building isn't up to code. If they win, you could be personally liable for millions in damages. As current owner of record, you would bear full responsibility. My head started spinning. Owner of record? Your husbands will list you as inheriting all properties and investments. That means any lawsuits, any debts, any liabilities become your responsibility. Your children's proposal would transfer those risks to them, protecting your personal assets. What personal assets? He looked at me with what might have been pity. This apartment. Your savings account. Your social security benefits. Without the protection of the trust structure your children are proposing, you could lose everything if these lawsuits go badly. I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Every word he spoke seemed designed to confuse and frighten me. But underneath the fear, I felt something else growing. Anger. You're saying that inheriting my husband's estate could ruin me financially? I'm saying that inheriting this particular estate, with all its complex legal and financial obligations, might be more than you're prepared to handle. Your children, with their business and legal experience, are much better positioned to manage these risks. And if I sign these papers, what do I get? Peace of mind. Security. Your children have agreed to provide you with a monthly allowance that will keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. How much? He consulted his notes. $2,000 per month, plus they'll continue to pay the maintenance fees on this apartment. $2,000 per month. Out of an estate worth $86 million. And if I don't sign? His expression hardened slightly. Then you'll be responsible for all legal fees, property management, tax obligations, and any damages awarded in current or future lawsuits. Mrs. Walsh, your children are trying to protect you from financial ruin. I stared at this stranger who had invaded my home, who was trying to convince me to give away my inheritance for my own good. The paternalistic tone in his voice reminded me of Harold explaining why I didn't need to worry about our finances, of my children explaining why I couldn't understand complex business matters, of everyone in my life assuming I was too simple to manage my own affairs. I need to think about this, I said. Of course. But I should mention that there are time constraints. The longer this matter remains unresolved, the more expensive it becomes for everyone involved. Your children are prepared to cover your legal fees as part of this arrangement, but only if we can reach an agreement quickly. How quickly? I'll need your signature by Friday. Today was Tuesday. They were giving me 3 days to decide whether to give away the largest inheritance in my family's history. After he left, I sat in Harold's chair and tried to make sense of everything I'd learned. $86 million. Lawsuits. Liabilities. Monthly allowances. Trust structures. The words swirled around in my head like a hurricane of confusion and fear. But underneath all of that, one thought kept surfacing: why hadn't Harold told me about any of this? Why had he left me so completely unprepared for what would happen after he died? I walked to our bedroom and opened the closet where I'd stored his things after the funeral. His clothes still hung there, suits he'd worn to work every day for 40 years, carefully maintained and pressed. I ran my hands over the fabric, remembering how proud he'd always been of his appearance, how he'd insisted that presentation mattered in business. In the inside pocket of his best suit, I found something I'd missed when I'd gone through his belongings. A small key, the kind that might fit a safety deposit box. My hands trembled as I examined it. There was a number engraved on the side, 847. And a bank name, First National of Manhattan. Harold had never mentioned a safety deposit box. The next morning, I took the subway to Manhattan and found the First National branch on East 62nd Street. My hands shook as I approached the customer service desk. I believe my late husband had a safety deposit box here, I said, showing them the key and Harold's death certificate. The bank officer, a young woman with kind eyes, checked their records and nodded. Yes, Mrs. Walsh. Box 847. You're listed as the authorized signer. Would you like to access it today? The safety deposit box room was small and private, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look stark and institutional. The bank officer unlocked box 847 with her key, then stepped back to let me use Harold's key. Inside the metal box were dozens of documents I'd never seen before. Property deeds. Investment statements. Insurance policies. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name written in Harold's familiar handwriting. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. My dearest Margaret, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've discovered what I've been hiding from you all these years. I know you'll be angry with me, and you have every right to be. I know you'll feel betrayed, and I can't blame you for that either. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. The truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid that if you knew how much money we really had, you'd want to spend it. Not on foolish things, but on the life we deserved. Vacations. A nicer house. Help around the apartment. Things that would have made you happy. And I was terrified of losing it all. The letter went on to explain his investments, his real estate purchases, his careful management of assets that had grown far beyond what he'd ever imagined. But it also revealed something else, his growing fear in his final years that our children were more interested in his money than in our family. I see the way Rachel looks at our finances when she thinks I'm not watching. I see how Tony asks questions about my investments while barely asking about my health. I'm afraid, Margaret. I'm afraid they're just waiting for me to die so they can get their hands on what I've built. The letter continued, I've set up the will to leave everything to you, not to them. You're the only one who ever loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. You're the only one who stayed by my side through everything. If they want the inheritance, they'll have to earn it by taking care of you the way you took care of me. I felt my heart breaking all over again. Harold had been testing our children, and they were failing spectacularly. The final paragraph of the letter made me sob out loud. I know I was wrong to hide this from you. I know I should have trusted you with the truth. I robbed you of the comfortable life you deserved, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But now it's yours. All of it. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve it. Don't let anyone make you feel small or stupid or unworthy. You are the strongest, most capable woman I've ever known. I just wish I'd been brave enough to tell you that while I was alive. I sat in that sterile room, surrounded by documents worth more than I could comprehend, and wept for the husband who'd loved me enough to protect me but hadn't loved me enough to trust me. I wept for the children who'd inherited his fear and suspicion instead of his love. And I wept for the years of my life I'd spent believing I was a burden when I was actually the foundation that held everything together. But underneath all that grief, something new was growing. Something I hadn't felt in decades. Anger. Pure, righteous, clarifying anger. I gathered up all the documents and put them in my purse. Then I walked out of that bank and did something I'd never done in my entire life. I hired my own lawyer. Her name was Sarah Martinez, and her office was in a gleaming tower in Midtown Manhattan. She was probably 45 years old, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. When I spread Harold's documents across her conference table, she let out a low whistle. Mrs. Walsh, do you understand what you're looking at? My husband's legacy, I said. The one my children want me to sign away. She spent an hour going through everything, making notes and asking questions. Finally, she sat back and looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Your husband was quite the investor. Very conservative, very smart. And he was also very clear about his intentions. Everything goes to you, with no restrictions, no conditions, no trust structures. It's yours to do with as you please. But the lawyer my children sent said there are lawsuits. Liabilities. That I could lose everything. She pulled out her laptop and spent several minutes typing and scrolling. I'm not finding any active lawsuits against any of these properties. No outstanding debts. No liens. Nothing that would threaten your inheritance. The room seemed to tilt around me. There are no lawsuits. None. Your husband's estate is actually remarkably clean. Whoever's been managing it since his death has done a good job maintaining the properties and keeping the investments profitable. My children have been managing it. Then they've done well. The estate has actually grown in value since your husband's death. Current net worth appears to be just over $91 million. $91 million. I felt dizzy. Mrs. Walsh, can I ask you something? What exactly did your children's lawyer tell you about your inheritance? I repeated everything David Chen had said about lawsuits and liabilities and the need to protect my personal assets. Sarah's expression grew darker with every word. Mrs. Walsh, what your children are proposing isn't asset protection. It's theft. Legal theft, but theft nonetheless. They're trying to convince you to give away a $91 million inheritance in exchange for $24,000 a year. The math was staggering. $24,000 a year for the rest of my life, maybe another 20 years if I was lucky, versus $91 million right now. What should I do? First, don't sign anything. Second, let me handle all communication with your children and their lawyer from now on. Third, start thinking about what you want to do with your inheritance. Because Mrs. Walsh, it really is yours to do with as you please. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by financial documents I was finally beginning to understand. The rental income from Harold's properties was $48,000 per month. Every month. I'd been living on Social Security while sitting on an income that could have paid for a luxury apartment, nice clothes, regular vacations, anything I wanted. But more than the money, what struck me was the deception. My children had been receiving substantial distributions from Harold's trust accounts for decades, money that should have been mine to control. They'd been living comfortable lives funded by inheritance they'd hidden from me, while watching me struggle financially and never offering to help. The next morning, I called Rachel. "Mom, thank God. We've been so worried about you. David Chen said you seemed confused about the estate documents." "I wasn't confused, Rachel. I was being careful. I've hired my own lawyer." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Mom, that was a mistake. You don't understand how expensive lawyers are. David Chen was providing his services as a favor to the family." "A favor to which family members, exactly? What do you mean?" "I mean, who is paying David Chen? Who has he been representing all these years while managing your father's estate?" "Mom, this is getting ridiculous. We're trying to help you." "No, Rachel. You're trying to steal from me." The words hung between us like a blade. I'd never accused my children of anything worse than leaving dishes in the sink, and here I was calling my daughter a thief. "How dare you," she said, her voice cold and deadly. "How dare you accuse us of stealing when we've been protecting your interests for 3 years? Protecting my interests by hiding $91 million from me?" Another long silence. "Who told you that number?" "It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that it's my money, and you've been keeping it from me while trying to convince me I'm too stupid to manage my own affairs." "You are too stupid." The words exploded from her like a dam bursting. "You spent your entire marriage letting Dad handle everything because you couldn't be bothered to understand basic finances. You worked at a deli for 40 years because you never had any ambition beyond making sandwiches. And now you think you can manage complex investments and business decisions? You'll lose everything within a year." Each word felt like a physical blow, but I didn't hang up. I needed to hear this. I needed to understand exactly what my daughter thought of me. "You know what, Mom? Fine. Take your precious inheritance. Blow it all on cruises and jewelry and whatever other foolish things you think you deserve. But don't come crying to us when you're broke and homeless in 5 years." "I won't," I said quietly. "What?" "I said I won't. I won't come crying to you for anything, ever again." "Mom, goodbye, Rachel." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment. For the first time in months, I felt completely calm. The worst thing had happened. My daughter had shown me exactly what she thought of me, and I'd survived it. That afternoon, Tony called. "Mom, Rachel told me about your conversation. I think there might have been some misunderstandings." "No misunderstandings, Tony. I understand perfectly now. Mom, we need to sit down and talk about this rationally. As adults." "I'm listening." "The money Dad left isn't just money. It's responsibility. It's legacy. It's something that affects the entire family, including Emma and Jake's futures. You can't just make unilateral decisions about it." "Actually, I can. It's my inheritance. It's our family's inheritance. Dad would have wanted us to work together on this." I thought about Harold's letter, about his fears that our children were more interested in his money than his family. I don't think that's what he wanted at all. "Mom, I'm going to be honest with you. Rachel and I have been talking, and we're prepared to go to court if necessary. We'll argue that you're not competent to manage this level of wealth. We'll have you declared mentally incompetent if that's what it takes to protect Dad's legacy." The threat hit me like ice water. They would have me declared mentally incompetent. They would take away not just my inheritance, but my independence, my dignity, my right to make my own decisions. "You would do that to me?" "We would do that for you. And for Dad. And for this family." After he hung up, I called Sarah Martinez immediately. "They're threatening to have me declared incompetent," I told her. "On what grounds?" "That I can't manage this much money responsibly." I could hear her typing in the background. "Mrs. Walsh, I need you to do something for me. I need you to see a doctor tomorrow and get a complete physical and mental health evaluation. I need medical documentation that you're completely competent to manage your own affairs." "Why?" "Because if your children are serious about this threat, we need to be prepared to fight it." "And Mrs. Walsh? After we get that documentation, I think it's time to take the offensive." The next morning, I went to see Dr. Patricia Brooks, a geriatric psychiatrist Sarah had recommended. I spent 3 hours answering questions, taking tests, and discussing my mental health history. Dr. Brooks was thorough and kind, and at the end of our session, she smiled. "Mrs. Walsh, you're as sharp as anyone half your age. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning skills are intact, and your decision-making capacity is completely normal. Anyone who suggests you're mentally incompetent is either ignorant or lying." That same day, Sarah filed a formal response to my children's lawyer, including Dr. Brooks' evaluation and a demand that all distributions from Harold's trust accounts cease immediately pending resolution of the estate. The response was swift and brutal. At 6 a.m. the next morning, there was pounding on my apartment door. I opened it to find Rachel, Tony, and Sandra, all looking like they hadn't slept. "Mom, what have you done?" Rachel's voice was shrill with panic. "I'm protecting my inheritance." "You've frozen all the trust accounts," Tony said. "Do you have any idea what that means?" "It means no more monthly distributions until we sort out what belongs to whom." "Mom, we have mortgages. We have expenses. We have obligations based on that income." I stared at my children, these two people who'd been secretly receiving thousands of dollars every month from their father's estate while watching me work into my 70s. They looked desperate, almost frightened. "How much have you been getting?" I asked. Tony and Rachel exchanged glances. "It's not about the amount," Rachel said. "How much?" $15,000 a month each, Sandra admitted, ignoring the sharp look Tony gave her. $15,000. Each. Every month. For years. While I was working at the deli for $12 an hour. "Mom, that was your choice," Tony said. "Dad offered to support you completely, but you insisted on working." "Because I thought we needed the money." "Dad tried to tell you we didn't need money, but you wouldn't listen. You were always worried about expenses, always clipping coupons, always trying to save money we didn't need to save. I felt like I was losing my mind. So you let me work myself into exhaustion while you collected $15,000 a month from your father's estate." "Dad wanted us to understand financial responsibility," Rachel said defensively. "By watching your mother struggle while you lived like millionaires?" The apartment fell silent except for the sound of traffic outside. We all stood there in my small living room, surrounded by the modest furniture and simple belongings that represented my entire life, while they wore clothes that cost more than I made in a month. "This is exactly why Dad set up the trusts," Rachel said finally. "He knew you'd react emotionally instead of thinking clearly about what's best for the family." "What's best for the family, or what's best for you? They're the same thing." Tony exploded. "Mom, we are your family. Emma and Jake are your family. The decisions we make about this money affect all of us." "Then why wasn't I included in any of those decisions?" "Because you don't understand the complexities involved." "Then explain them to me." "We've tried to explain." "No, you've tried to confuse me with legal language and scare tactics. You've tried to convince me I'm too stupid to understand my own husband's will. But I'm not stupid, and I'm not signing away my inheritance so you can continue living off money that should be mine." Rachel's face twisted with something that looked like rage. "Fine, Mom. You want to destroy this family over money? You want to force us into court and make us fight our own mother? You want to tear apart everything Dad built? Your father built this wealth for me, not for you." His letter made that very clear. "What letter?" Tony demanded. I'd been waiting for this moment. I pulled Harold's letter from my purse and handed it to Tony. I watched their faces as they read their father's words about being afraid they were only interested in his money, about wanting them to prove their love by taking care of me. "He was testing us," Tony said quietly. "Yes. And you're failing." Rachel crumpled the letter in her fist. "This doesn't change anything." Dad was paranoid in his final years. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking clearly enough to leave everything to me. Because he was manipulated by guilt and fear. Because he was old and sick and not making rational decisions. I looked at my daughter, this woman who was calling her father paranoid and irrational because he'd left his money to his wife instead of his children. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, get out of my house. All of you." "We're your children," Sandra said, speaking for the first time. "We love you." I looked at Sandra, this woman who'd married into our family 15 years ago, who barely spoke to me at family gatherings, who was now claiming to love me. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have spent years taking money that belonged to me while watching me struggle. If you loved me, you wouldn't be trying to steal my inheritance. If you loved me, you'd be happy that your father provided for me instead of angry that he didn't provide for you." "He did provide for us," Tony said. "The trust distributions were my money. From my husband's estate. Money you took without telling me." I walked to the door and opened it. "I want you to leave. And I don't want you to come back until you're ready to treat me with the respect I deserve." They filed out silently, but Rachel turned back at the doorway. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," she said. "And when you lose everything, don't expect us to bail you out." "I won't," I replied, and closed the door. That night, I called Sarah Martinez. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm angry," I said. "I'm hurt. I'm disappointed. But I'm also something I haven't been in years. What's that? Free. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked to untangle the complex web of trusts and accounts Harold had set up. What we discovered was both impressive and heartbreaking. Harold had been a brilliant investor, turning his uncle's modest inheritance into a fortune through careful real estate purchases and stock market investments. But he'd also been a controlling husband, managing every aspect of our finances without including me in any decisions. The trust accounts my children had been accessing were supposed to be for emergencies and education expenses. Instead, they'd been treating them like personal allowances, funding lifestyles they couldn't have afforded on their own salaries. Tony made decent money as a lawyer, but not enough to afford the house in Westchester and private schools for his children. Rachel had never held a steady job, yet she lived like a wealthy woman. They've been living off your inheritance for years, Sarah explained. And now they're panicking because they can't maintain their lifestyles without it. What happens now? Now we settle the estate properly. We transfer all assets to your name, we close the trust accounts, and we make sure you have complete control over your inheritance. And my children? That's up to you, Mrs. Walsh. You can choose to provide for them or not. But it will be your choice, not theirs. The legal process took 2 months. 2 months during which my children tried everything they could think of to change my mind. They sent flowers with apology cards that felt hollow and calculated. They had Emma and Jake call me with tearful pleas to keep the family together. They even convinced Harold's old business partner to call and warn me about the dangers of sudden wealth. But I'd found something during those 2 months that I'd lost years ago, my backbone. I spent time with Sarah's financial advisors, learning about investments and asset management. I discovered that I was perfectly capable of understanding complex financial matters when people bothered to explain them to me instead of dismissing my questions. I learned about my options, my rights, and my responsibilities as a wealthy woman. I also spent time alone, really alone, for the first time in my adult life. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I took walks through Central Park and noticed things I'd been too busy to see before. I went to museums and galleries, exploring parts of Manhattan I'd never visited despite living in Queens for 40 years. And slowly, I began to understand that my children's greatest crime wasn't trying to steal my money. It was making me believe I was worthless. The final settlement meeting was held in Sarah's conference room on a cold April morning. Tony and Rachel sat across from me with their lawyer, looking like defendants at a trial. The last 2 months had taken their toll. Rachel's designer clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, and Tony's usually perfect appearance seemed somehow diminished. Sarah placed a stack of documents in front of me. Mrs. Walsh, these papers transfer all assets from your husband's estate to your sole ownership. The total value, as of this morning, is $93.2 million. I heard Rachel gasp, but I didn't look at her. I focused on the numbers, trying to absorb the reality of what I was inheriting. $93 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Your monthly income from rental properties and investment returns will be approximately $52,000. You also have the option to sell properties or liquidate investments if you prefer a lump sum for any particular purpose. $52,000 per month. I thought about my Social Security check of $863 and wanted to laugh or cry or maybe both. Mrs. Walsh, Davidson spoke for the first time. My clients want you to know that despite the unfortunate misunderstandings of the past few months, they remain committed to family unity. They're prepared to help you manage these assets in whatever way you feel comfortable. I looked at him, this man who'd tried to convince me to give away my inheritance, and felt nothing but contempt. Mr. Chen, your client spent months trying to steal from me, then threatened to have me declared incompetent when I refused to cooperate. I'm not interested in their help. Mrs. Walsh, Rachel said, her voice small and desperate. We never meant to hurt you. We were just trying to protect Dad's legacy. You were trying to protect your monthly allowances. That's not fair, Tony said. We've been managing the estate responsibly for 3 years. We've increased its value. We've maintained the properties. We've done everything Dad would have wanted. Except respect his widow. The room fell silent. Sarah slid the signature pages toward me, and I signed them without hesitation. $93 million. It was really mine now. Don't do this, Mom, Rachel said, tears running down her cheeks. Please don't cut us out of your life over money. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The tears seemed genuine, but I wasn't sure if she was crying for me or for the lifestyle she was about to lose. I'm not cutting you out of my life, Rachel. But I'm not going to be taken advantage of anymore either. What does that mean? It means that if you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on love and respect, not money. It means you need to apologize for the way you've treated me, and you need to mean it. It means you need to prove that you care about me as a person, not just as a source of income. And if we do that? I thought carefully about my answer. These were still my children, despite everything they'd put me through. They were still the babies I'd nursed, the toddlers I'd taught to walk, the teenagers I'd worried about when they stayed out too late. If you do that, genuinely and consistently, then we'll see. But Rachel, the days of me giving you money just because you ask for it are over. The days of me accepting disrespect because I'm afraid of losing you are over. From now on, if you want to be part of my life, you'll have to earn it. Rachel looked like I'd slapped her. Earn it? Mom, we're your children. Act like it then. After the meeting ended and the lawyers left, I sat alone in Sarah's conference room, staring at the documents that had just made me one of the wealthiest women in New York. I thought about Harold, about the letter he'd left me, about the test he designed for our children. They'd failed his test, but maybe that didn't have to be the end of the story. Maybe they could still learn to love me for who I was instead of what I could give them. Maybe it wasn't too late for them to prove they were worthy of the father who'd raised them with such hope and such fear. But if they couldn't learn, if they couldn't change, then I'd be fine without them. For the first time in my life, I had the resources to be completely independent. I could travel anywhere, live anywhere, do anything I wanted. I could fund charities, help people in need, make a real difference in the world. I could be happy with or without my children's love. That evening, I sat in Harold's chair and called Uncle Robert in Arizona. Margaret, how did everything go today? I'm rich, Robert. Officially and legally rich. He laughed, the same warm laugh that had comforted me through Harold's funeral and the difficult months afterward. Harold would be so proud of you. Standing up for yourself like that, fighting for what's rightfully yours. Do you think he'd be disappointed in Rachel and Tony? Robert was quiet for a long moment. I think he'd be heartbroken. But I also think he'd be hopeful. People can change, Margaret. Sometimes they just need the right motivation. What if they don't change? Then you'll build a new life without them. You're 73 years old, but you could have another 20 years ahead of you. Good years. Happy years. Don't waste them waiting for people to love you the way you deserve to be loved. After I hung up, I walked through my small apartment, seeing it with new eyes. The worn furniture, the faded photographs, the cracked window frame that let in the city's noise. I'd lived here for 40 years, raised my children here, mourned my husband here. But it had never really been mine. Harold had made all the decisions about where we lived, how we lived, what we could afford. Now everything was different. I could stay in Queens or move to Manhattan. I could buy a house in the suburbs or a penthouse on Park Avenue. I could travel to Europe or Asia or anywhere else I'd dreamed of visiting. I could hire help or learn to cook gourmet meals or eat at expensive restaurants every night. For the first time in my life, every choice was mine to make. But first, I had to deal with the aftermath of my newfound independence. My children weren't going to give up easily. The campaign began the next morning. Emma called first. Grandma, Mom is crying. She says you hate her now. Emma was 19, a sophomore at Columbia, smart and beautiful and completely naive about her parents' financial situation. I don't hate your mother, sweetheart. But I'm very disappointed in the way she's treated me. She said you took away all the family money. I didn't take it away, Emma. It was mine to begin with. Your grandfather left it to me, not to your parents. But Mom said Dad had been managing it for you because you didn't understand it. I closed my eyes, trying to find patience. Emma, has your mother ever told you how much money your parents have been receiving from your grandfather's estate? No. Mom doesn't talk about money stuff with me. $15,000 a month. Each. For years. While I worked at a deli making $12 an hour. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Emma? $15,000 a month? That's like $180,000 a year. Yes. And you were working at a deli? Yes. Oh my God, Grandma. I didn't know. Mom never said. I mean, I knew Dad had inherited some money, but I didn't know it was that much, or that it was supposed to be yours. It's okay, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. But it's not okay. If that money was supposed to take care of you, why didn't they take care of you? It was such a simple question, and it cut right to the heart of everything that had gone wrong. I don't know, Emma. You'd have to ask them. Jake called later that afternoon. He was 17, a senior in high school, and unlike his sister, he got straight to the point. Grandma, my parents are freaking out. Dad says we might have to sell the house. I'm sorry to hear that, Jake. Are you really not going to help us anymore? I thought about how to answer him. Jake had always been my favorite grandchild, probably because he reminded me of Harold at that age. He was curious and thoughtful, and he'd always seemed to enjoy spending time with me. Jake, do you think it's fair that your parents received hundreds of thousands of dollars from your grandfather's estate while I lived on Social Security? I guess not. But Grandma, it's not just about Mom and Dad. Emma and I didn't know about any of this. We're going to suffer too if you cut them off. How will you suffer? Well, my college fund is gone, for one thing. Dad was using the monthly payments to save for my tuition, and now there's nothing. I felt a stab of anger. Tony had been receiving $15,000 a month for years, and he hadn't saved any of it for his son's education? Jake, where do you want to go to college? I got accepted to Princeton, but Dad says we can't afford it now. Princeton. One of the best universities in the country, and my grandson couldn't attend because his father had been too irresponsible to actually save the money he'd been given for his children's futures. What if I paid for your college directly? You would do that? Of course I would. You're my grandson. I want you to have every opportunity. But what about Emma? She's already at Columbia, and her tuition is like $60,000 a year. $60,000 a year, and Tony had claimed he couldn't afford to help with my medical expenses when I'd had pneumonia last winter. I'll take care of Emma too. But Jake, I need you to understand something. This money I'm inheriting was supposed to take care of me. Your parents tried to steal it from me. They tried to convince me I was too stupid to manage my own affairs. They hurt me very badly. I know, Grandma. And I'm sorry. But they're still my parents. They're still my children too. But that doesn't mean I have to let them take advantage of me. So what happens now? Now I take care of myself for the first time in my life. And I'll take care of you and Emma too, because I love you. But your parents are going to have to learn to live within their means. Dad says he might have to declare bankruptcy. The idea of Tony, with his law degree and his expensive suits, declaring bankruptcy because he couldn't continue receiving money from his mother's inheritance struck me as both tragic and ridiculous. Then maybe he'll learn to budget better. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I went shopping. Not grocery shopping or shopping for necessities, but actual shopping for things I wanted. I started at Bergdorf Goodman, a store I'd only ever window shopped at during my rare trips to Manhattan. The saleswoman who approached me looked skeptical when she saw my worn coat and orthopedic shoes, but her attitude changed quickly when I pulled out the credit card Sarah had helped me obtain based on my new financial status. I bought 3 dresses, a cashmere coat, and a pair of Italian leather shoes that cost more than I used to make in a month. I bought a handbag that I'd admired for years and jewelry that made me feel like a different person entirely. But more than the clothes and accessories, I bought something invaluable: respect. The salespeople treated me with courtesy and attention once they realized I was serious about spending money. They called me Mrs. Walsh and asked about my preferences and made me feel like a valued customer instead of a burden to be tolerated. That evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror wearing one of my new dresses, and I barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me stood straighter, smiled wider, and radiated a confidence I'd never possessed before. I was still admiring my reflection when my phone rang. Rachel. Mom, we need to talk. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Can I come over? Are you planning to apologize? Mom, please. Just let me come over. An hour later, Rachel stood in my living room wearing jeans and a sweater I'd never seen before. She looked tired and older than her 38 years. You look different, she said, taking in my new dress and jewelry. I feel different. Mom, I want to apologize for some of the things I said. I was stressed and scared, and I took it out on you. Some of the things? She shifted uncomfortably. All of the things. I'm sorry for all of it. What specifically are you sorry for, Rachel? I'm sorry for not including you in financial decisions about Dad's estate. I'm sorry for trying to convince you to sign over your inheritance. I'm sorry for calling you stupid and worthless. The apology felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the car on the way over. And why are you sorry for those things? Because they hurt your feelings. I studied my daughter's face, looking for genuine remorse and finding only calculation. Rachel, do you understand why what you did was wrong? Because it made you angry? No. Because it was theft. Because it was elder abuse. Because it was a betrayal of everything I thought we meant to each other. She looked confused, as if she'd never considered that her actions might be objectively wrong rather than just hurtful to me. Mom, we were trying to protect you. From what? From making mistakes with money. From being taken advantage of by strangers. So you took advantage of me instead? We didn't take advantage of you. We managed Dad's estate responsibly. While lying to me about its value and trying to steal my inheritance. We weren't trying to steal anything. We were trying to preserve Dad's legacy. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd loved since the moment she was born, and realized she genuinely didn't understand what she'd done wrong. In her mind, she was the victim of my unreasonable demands and emotional reactions. Rachel, I think you should leave. Mom, I'm trying to apologize here. No, you're trying to manipulate me into forgiving you without actually taking responsibility for your actions. That's not true. Then tell me this, if I agreed to resume the monthly payments to you and Tony, would you still want a relationship with me? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The pause was all the answer I needed. That's what I thought. Mom, it's not about the money. It's entirely about the money, Rachel. It always has been. After she left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle in the distance. I felt sad but not devastated, disappointed but not destroyed. For the first time in months, I was at peace with my decisions. My phone rang again an hour later. This time it was Tony. Mom, Rachel told me about your conversation tonight. Did she tell you what she said? She told me you rejected her apology. I rejected her manipulation. Mom, what do you want from us? What would it take for you to forgive us? It was such a simple question, but the answer was more complex than I'd realized. I want you to understand that I'm not your ATM or your caretaker or your burden to be managed. I'm your mother. I want you to respect me as an equal, not dismiss me as an inconvenience. I want you to love me for who I am, not what I can provide. We do love you. Tony, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited me without needing something? When was the last time you included me in family decisions or asked my opinion about anything important? The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I've been busy with work. You've been busy with work for 20 years. But you've never been too busy to cash the checks from your father's estate. That's different. How is it different? The trust distributions were automatic. I didn't have to do anything to receive them. Exactly. You didn't have to maintain a relationship with me to get the money. You didn't have to pretend to care about me or spend time with me or treat me with respect. The money just appeared in your account every month, no strings attached. Mom, that's not fair. What's not fair is watching your mother work into her 70s while you collect $15,000 a month from money that should have been hers. What's not fair is trying to convince her she's too stupid to manage her own inheritance. What's not fair is threatening to have her declared mentally incompetent when she refuses to give you what you want. I never should have said that. I was desperate. Desperate for what? To continue living beyond your means with money that wasn't yours? Desperate to keep our family together. Our family was never together, Tony. You and Rachel have been living your own lives, funded by your father's estate, while I've been living in Queens on Social Security. We've been strangers for years. I was just too blind to see it. It doesn't have to be that way. You're right. It doesn't. But that's up to you and Rachel. You can choose to build real relationships with me based on love and respect, or you can continue to see me as a source of income. But you can't have both. The next few weeks passed quietly. My children didn't call, and I didn't call them. Emma and Jake reached out a few times, and I made sure they understood that my conflict with their parents wouldn't affect my relationship with them. I set up college funds for both of them and made arrangements to pay their tuition directly to their schools. I also began to explore my new life as a wealthy woman. I hired a housekeeper who came in twice a week, not because I needed the help but because I could afford it and it gave me more time for other activities. I joined the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a patron member and started attending lectures and special exhibitions. I took a cooking class in Little Italy, learning to make pasta from scratch from a grandmother who'd immigrated from Sicily 60 years earlier. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation, who helped me process the grief and anger I felt about my children's betrayal. It's normal to mourn the relationship you thought you had with them, Dr. Walsh explained during one of our sessions. You're grieving the loss of an illusion, and that's just as painful as grieving the loss of reality. Will I ever be able to forgive them? That depends on whether they give you something to forgive. Forgiveness requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing and genuine remorse. Without those elements, what you're really talking about is excusing their behavior, and that's not the same thing. I keep thinking about when they were children. They weren't always like this. Money changes people, Margaret. Sometimes it reveals who they really were underneath. Sometimes it transforms them into people they never thought they'd become. The question is whether they can find their way back to being the people you remember. And if they can't, then you'll build a life that brings you joy and fulfillment without them. You're not responsible for their choices, Margaret. You're only responsible for your own. 3 months into my new life, I decided to take a trip. Not just a weekend getaway or a short vacation, but a real journey to places I'd always dreamed of visiting. I booked a month-long tour of Italy, with stops in Rome, Florence, Venice, and the Amalfi Coast. I was packing for the trip when my phone rang. Emma. Grandma, I have something to tell you, and I don't think you're going to like it. What is it, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are selling the house. I felt a stab of regret. The house in Westchester had been Rachel and Tom's home for 15 years, and it was where Emma and Jake had grown up. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want my grandchildren to lose their childhood home. Why are they selling? They can't afford the mortgage payments without the money from Grandpa's estate. Dad says they never should have bought such an expensive house, but they thought the income would continue forever. Where will you live? Dad found a rental in Queens. It's smaller than our house, but it's closer to his office so he won't have to commute to Manhattan every day. Queens. My children were moving back to the borough where they'd grown up, the one Rachel had always looked down on as not sophisticated enough for her tastes. How are you handling all of this, Emma? I'm okay. Actually, I think it might be good for our family. Mom and Dad have been so stressed about money, and now they'll have to learn to live within their budget. Maybe they'll be happier. Emma's maturity and wisdom impressed me. She was handling her parents' financial crisis with more grace than they were. Have you talked to Jake? Yeah, he's actually excited about moving. He says the house always felt too big and empty, and the new place will be more cozy. What about your parents? How are they adjusting? Emma was quiet for a moment. Grandma, can I tell you something without you getting mad? Of course. I think Mom and Dad are finally starting to understand what they did to you. What do you mean? Living without that extra money every month has been really hard for them. They're having to make all these sacrifices and tough decisions, and I heard Mom telling Dad that she never realized how much stress you must have been under all those years when you were worried about money. Did she say that? Yeah. And Dad said he felt terrible about how they treated you, but he didn't know how to fix it. They could start by admitting what they did was wrong. I think they know it was wrong, Grandma. They're just too proud to admit it. Pride is a luxury they can no longer afford. The day before I left for Italy, I did something impulsive. I drove out to Westchester to see the house where my children had lived for 15 years, the house they were about to lose because they'd built their lives around money that was never really theirs. It was a beautiful house, much larger and grander than the modest home in Queens where I'd raised them. The kind of house I'd dreamed of owning when they were children, when Harold and I were struggling to make ends meet on his salary and my part-time jobs. But looking at it now, I felt no envy or regret. It was just a house, and houses could be replaced. What couldn't be replaced was the trust between family members, the respect between mother and children, the love that should have transcended any financial considerations. As I sat in my car looking at their soon-to-be former home, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or disappointed or bitter. I was sad for what we'd lost, but I was also hopeful for what we might still build. Italy was everything I'd dreamed it would be and more. I walked through the ruins of ancient Rome, marveled at Renaissance art in Florence, and rode gondolas through the canals of Venice. I ate incredible food, drank wonderful wine, and met fascinating people from all over the world. But more than the sights and experiences, what I treasured most about the trip was the sense of independence and confidence it gave me. I navigated foreign cities, communicated in broken Italian, and solved problems on my own. I proved to myself that I was capable of far more than my children had ever given me credit for. I was sitting at a cafe on the Amalfi Coast, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean, when I got a text from Rachel. Mom, I know you're traveling and probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that we've moved. Our new address is enclosed if you want to send a postcard. I hope you're having a wonderful trip. Love, Rachel. It was the first communication I'd received from her that didn't include a request for money or an attempt at manipulation. Just a simple message letting me know where she was and hoping I was happy. I sat there watching the sun disappear into the sea, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. When I returned from Italy, I found a letter waiting for me. Tony's handwriting on the envelope, my name and Queen's address written in the careful script I remembered from his childhood homework. Dear Mom, the letter began. I've started this letter a dozen times over the past month, and I keep throwing it away because I don't know how to say what needs to be said. But I'm going to try one more time, because some things are more important than pride. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in blue ink, and it was the most honest communication I'd received from either of my children in years. Tony wrote about the stress and fear he'd felt when the trust payments stopped, about having to sell their house and move to a smaller apartment, about having to explain to his children why their lives were changing so dramatically. But he also wrote about the realizations that had come with those changes. I've been thinking about all those years when you worked at the deli, he wrote. About how tired you looked when you came home, how you'd soak your feet in the bathtub because you'd been standing all day. I never understood why you kept working when Dad always said we had enough money. Now I understand that you didn't know we had money. You thought we needed every penny, so you sacrificed your comfort and health to contribute. The letter continued, I've also been thinking about the way Rachel and I talked to you during those meetings with the lawyers. We treated you like you were stupid and incompetent, like you couldn't understand basic concepts about money and investments. But you weren't stupid, Mom. You were uninformed, and there's a big difference. Dad kept you uninformed, and then we used that against you. I felt tears running down my cheeks as I read his words. I don't know if you can ever forgive us for what we did. I don't know if we deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that losing that monthly income has taught me something important. Money is just a tool. It's not worth destroying relationships over. It's not worth hurting people you love. And it's certainly not worth losing your mother. The letter ended with an invitation. Rachel and I would like to take you to dinner. Not to ask for anything, not to try to convince you of anything, but just to spend time with you. We want to hear about your trip to Italy. We want to know about your new life. We want to try to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of respect instead of money. If you're willing to give us another chance, please let us know. If not, we'll understand. Love, Tony. I sat in Harold's chair, holding the letter and thinking about forgiveness. Dr. Walsh had been right that forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing and genuine remorse. This letter contained both of those elements, at least from Tony. But I'd been hurt so deeply and for so long that I wasn't sure I was ready to trust again. How could I know this wasn't just another manipulation, another attempt to get back into my good graces so they could eventually return to taking advantage of me? I decided to test the waters carefully. I called Tony the next evening. Mom. His voice was filled with relief and something that sounded like genuine joy. I've been hoping you'd call. Did you get my letter? I got it. Thank you for being so honest. I should have been honest months ago. Years ago, actually. Tony, before we talk about having dinner, I need to know something. Are you and Rachel planning to ask me for money? No, Mum. Absolutely not. Not now, or not ever. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him thinking. Mom, I won't lie to you. Our financial situation is tight right now, and it would be easy for me to ask you for help. But I don't want money to be part of our relationship anymore. If we can't build something real between us, then we don't deserve to have anything at all. What about Rachel? Does she feel the same way? You'll have to ask her yourself. But I think losing the house and having to move back to Queens has been a wake-up call for her. She's had to face some hard truths about the way we've been living. What kind of truths? That we were living beyond our means. That we were dependent on money that wasn't really ours. That we'd lost sight of what actually matters in life. I wanted to believe him, but trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself overnight. I'd be willing to try dinner, I said finally. But I have some conditions. Whatever you want. First, no discussions about money. Not my inheritance, not your financial situation, nothing about finances at all. Second, no guilt trips about family unity or how much you miss me. Third, if at any point I feel like you're trying to manipulate me, I'm leaving. Understood. When would you like to meet? Next Saturday. 7 p.m. I'll choose the restaurant. Perfect. Mom? Yes? Thank you for giving us another chance. I chose a restaurant in Manhattan, a small Italian place in Little Italy where I'd eaten during my cooking class. It was public enough that I'd feel safe, but intimate enough for real conversation. Rachel and Tony arrived exactly on time, and I was struck by how different they looked. Gone were the expensive clothes and perfectly styled hair. Rachel wore a simple black dress that I recognized from years earlier, and Tony's suit was one I'd seen many times before. They looked like normal people instead of wealthy socialites. Mom, you look incredible, Rachel said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Italy obviously agreed with you. I was wearing one of the dresses I'd bought at Bergdorf Goodman, and I felt confident and elegant in a way I never had when I was married to Harold. Thank you. You both look well. We were seated at a corner table, and for the first few minutes, the conversation was awkward and stilted. But gradually, as we talked about my trip and their move and the grandchildren's activities, something began to relax between us. Tell us about Venice, Tony said. I've always wanted to go there. For the next hour, I told them stories about my adventures in Italy. The Basilica in St. Mark's Square, the glass-blowing demonstration in Murano, the tiny restaurant in Rome where the owner insisted on teaching me his grandmother's recipe for carbonara. They listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at my descriptions of trying to navigate Italian train stations with limited language skills. I'm so proud of you for taking that trip, Rachel said. I can't imagine traveling alone to a foreign country. I wasn't sure I could do it either, I admitted. But it turned out to be one of the best experiences of my life. What was the best part? Tony asked. I thought about it for a moment. The independence. The feeling that I could handle whatever came up. The realization that I'm braver and more capable than I ever gave myself credit for. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry we made you feel like you weren't capable. You've always been the strongest person I know. I haven't felt strong in a long time. Well, you should. Look at what you've accomplished. You stood up to us when we were trying to bully you. You hired your own lawyer. You figured out Dad's financial records. You took control of your inheritance. You traveled halfway around the world by yourself. That takes incredible strength. I looked at my daughter, trying to read her expression, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. But all I saw was regret and what looked like genuine admiration. Thank you, I said simply. As the evening progressed, both Rachel and Tony began to open up about the difficult months they'd experienced since the trust payments stopped. I had no idea how much we were spending until the money wasn't there anymore, Rachel admitted. I was buying clothes and jewelry and expensive groceries without even thinking about it. I was living like I was rich, but I wasn't rich. I was just getting an allowance from my dead father's estate. What's it been like, learning to budget? I asked. Humbling, Tony said. I haven't had to worry about money since I was in college. Having to choose between fixing the car and buying new school clothes for Jake has been a reality check. Is that what it was like for you and Dad when Rachel and I were growing up? Rachel asked. Worse, I said. We didn't have a safety net. If your father got sick and couldn't work, we had nothing to fall back on. Every month was a struggle to make sure we had enough for rent and groceries and utilities. And we never knew, Tony said quietly. Your father didn't want you to worry about money. He wanted you to focus on your education and your futures. But you were worried about money all the time. Yes, I was. And we let you worry. Even after we started getting the trust payments, we never offered to help with your expenses or medical bills or anything. I thought about all the times I'd stressed about small purchases, all the times I'd needed help and been too proud to ask for it, all the times I'd watched my children live comfortable lives while I struggled. No, you didn't offer to help. Because we didn't think of you as someone who needed help, Rachel said. We thought of you as someone who was just naturally good at managing on very little money. We thought you chose to live modestly. I didn't choose it. I couldn't afford anything else. The weight of that admission settled over our table like a heavy blanket. My children sat in silence, finally understanding the full scope of what their ignorance and selfishness had cost me. Mom, Rachel said finally, I know I can never undo the pain we've caused you. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. But I want you to know that I understand now what we took from you. Not just money, but dignity, respect, the belief that your own children cared about your well-being. We cared, Tony said. But we cared in a selfish, abstract way. We cared about you being alive and healthy enough to be there when we needed you, but we didn't care about your daily struggles or your happiness or your dreams. What are my dreams? I asked suddenly. They both looked confused. What are my dreams, my hopes, my interests? What do I like to do for fun? What are my favorite books or movies or foods? What makes me happy? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. I don't know, Rachel whispered. Neither do I, Tony admitted. That's what I realized in Italy, I said. That my own children don't actually know me as a person. You know me as Mom, as the woman who raised you and took care of you and worried about you. But you don't know Margaret the individual, with her own thoughts and feelings and desires. We'd like to know, Rachel said. If you'll let us. It's not about letting you. It's about you caring enough to ask. It's about you being interested in my life for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can do for you. We are interested, Tony insisted. Then prove it. Not tonight, not in one dinner, but over time. Show me that you want a relationship with me that's based on mutual respect and genuine affection. How do we do that? The same way you build any relationship. You spend time together. You have conversations about things that matter. You show up when it's important. You support each other through good times and bad times. Even though we don't need your money anymore? Rachel asked. Especially because you don't need my money anymore. Because then I'll know that you're spending time with me because you want to, not because you have to. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Tony reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, I know we have a lot of work to do to rebuild your trust in us. I know it might take years, and I know you might never fully forgive us. But I want you to know that having dinner with you tonight has been the happiest I've felt in months. Why? Because for the first time in I don't know how long, we talked to each other like real people. Not like a parent and children with all the baggage that comes with that, but like three adults who might actually enjoy each other's company. Rachel nodded in agreement. I forgot how funny you are, Mom. I forgot how smart you are. I forgot how much I used to enjoy talking to you before everything got so complicated. Before money got in the way, I corrected. Before money got in the way, she agreed. That night, I lay in bed thinking about forgiveness and second chances and the difference between earning love and buying it. My children had hurt me deeply, and I would never forget the pain they'd caused. But they were also human beings capable of growth and change, and tonight I'd seen glimpses of the people they might become. More importantly, I'd seen glimpses of the relationship we might be able to build if we were all willing to do the work. Over the next few months, Rachel and Tony made genuine efforts to get to know me as a person rather than just as their mother. They called regularly, not to ask for anything but just to check in and see how I was doing. They invited me to Emma's college poetry reading and Jake's high school graduation. They asked about my cooking classes and my museum visits and my plans for future travels. Rachel started volunteering at a senior center in Queens, working with elderly people who reminded her, she said, of what I must have experienced during all those years of financial stress. Tony signed up for a financial literacy course, learning to manage money responsibly for the first time in his adult life. They were both seeing therapists, working through their complicated relationships with money and their feelings about Harold's estate and their treatment of me. It was slow progress, and there were setbacks and difficult conversations, but gradually I began to see the people I'd hoped they would become when they were children. 6 months after our first dinner, Rachel called me with an unusual request. Mom, I've been thinking about Dad's letter, the one where he said he was testing us to see if we'd take care of you. What about it? I think we failed his test. Not just by trying to steal your inheritance, but by failing to take care of you long before he died. We took his money for years, but we never took his instructions seriously. What instructions? To take care of you. To make sure you were provided for. To treat you with respect and love. I was quiet, not sure where this conversation was heading. I know it's too late to pass his test, Rachel continued. But I'd like to try anyway. Not for the inheritance, I know that's yours to keep forever. But for my own peace of mind. For the chance to prove that I can be the daughter he raised me to be. What did you have in mind? I want to take care of you the way you took care of us when we were growing up. I want to call you every day to see how you're doing. I want to bring you groceries when you don't feel like going out. I want to sit with you when you're sick. I want to celebrate your birthdays and holidays and all the little moments that matter. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Rachel, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've used up all my chances and then some. But if you'll let me try, I promise I'll do better. I promise I'll be better. What about Tony? He wants the same thing. We've talked about it, and we both want to prove that we can love you without needing anything from you. 3 weeks later, it was my 74th birthday. I'd planned to spend it quietly, maybe treating myself to a nice dinner and a Broadway show. But when I woke up that morning, there was a knock at my door. Rachel stood in the hallway holding a homemade apple pie. Happy birthday, Mom. Behind her were Tony, Emma, Jake, and Sandra, all carrying wrapped presents and wearing genuine smiles. What's all this? Your birthday party, Jake said. We wanted to celebrate you properly this year. They'd organized everything without asking me for money or expecting me to host or clean or prepare anything. They'd brought the food, decorated my apartment, and planned activities based on things they'd learned about my interests over the past few months. Emma had researched my family history and created a beautiful photo album of ancestors I'd told her about during our recent conversations. Jake had written a short story inspired by my trip to Italy. Tony had framed the letter Harold had left me, turning it into a piece of art that honored both his father's love and my strength. But Rachel's gift was the most meaningful. She'd written me a letter of her own. Dear Mom, it began, I've spent most of my adult life taking you for granted. I thought you would always be there, always be willing to forgive me, always put my needs ahead of your own. I thought that was what mothers did, sacrifice themselves for their children without expecting anything in return. The letter continued, but I was wrong. Mothers are people too, with their own dreams and needs and feelings. They deserve to be loved and respected and appreciated, not just when they're useful but all the time. They deserve to be seen as individuals, not just as sources of care and comfort and financial support. She wrote about the person she was becoming, about the lessons she was learning in therapy, about her hopes for our future relationship. But what meant the most to me were her final words, I know I can never repay you for all the years you spent taking care of me. But I can spend the rest of your life making sure you know how much you matter, how much you're loved, and how proud I am to be your daughter. Happy birthday to the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I know. As I sat surrounded by my family, eating homemade cake and opening thoughtful presents, I realized that Harold's test had been worth something after all. Not because my children had passed it initially, but because failing it had forced them to confront who they really were and who they wanted to become. Money had nearly destroyed our family, but it had also saved us by forcing us to face hard truths about what we valued and what we were willing to sacrifice for wealth. A year has passed since that birthday celebration, and my life has settled into a rhythm I never could have imagined when I was standing outside Rachel's house being told I wasn't welcome. I spend my days doing things I love, taking art classes, reading books I'd always meant to read, volunteering at a literacy center in Manhattan where I teach English to elderly immigrants. I travel regularly, sometimes alone and sometimes with new friends I've made through my various activities. I've been to France, where I spent 2 weeks in Provence learning to paint watercolors. I've been to Japan, where I studied tea ceremony and meditation. Next month, I'm going to Scotland to explore the countryside where my grandmother was born. My relationship with my children continues to evolve. We have dinner together once a month, and they call regularly just to talk. They've learned to see me as Margaret the person rather than just Mom the caretaker, and I've learned to trust that their affection is genuine rather than calculated. Rachel has become dedicated to senior advocacy, working with a nonprofit that helps elderly people navigate financial and legal issues. Tony has started a small practice specializing in elder law, often taking cases pro bono for clients who can't afford representation. They're both different people than they were a year ago, shaped by the consequences of their actions and their commitment to making amends. Emma graduated from Columbia with honors and is working for a foundation that provides college scholarships to first-generation students. Jake was accepted to Princeton with a full scholarship I provided, but he's earning spending money by tutoring high school students in math and science. Neither of my grandchildren has ever asked me for money beyond their education expenses, and both seem determined to build independent lives funded by their own efforts. As for my inheritance, it has grown to over $100 million through careful investment management guided by advisors Sarah recommended. I live comfortably on the income it generates, but I'm also using it to make a difference in the world. I've established scholarships for low-income women returning to college, funded a program that provides financial literacy education to seniors, and made substantial donations to organizations that fight elder abuse. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned that wealth without respect is meaningless, and that love without boundaries is destructive. My children's attempts to steal from me were terrible, but they forced me to discover my own worth and strength. I learned that I could survive without their approval, which paradoxically made their genuine love more precious when it finally arrived. Harold's letter had been right about one thing: I was stronger and more capable than anyone had ever given me credit for, including myself. It just took losing everything I thought I wanted to discover everything I actually needed. Sometimes people ask me if I would do anything differently if I could go back to that night when Rachel told me I wasn't welcome in her house. Would I sign the papers that would have given them control of Harold's estate? Would I avoid the confrontation that nearly destroyed our family? The answer is no. Every painful moment, every sleepless night, every tear I shed was necessary to get us to where we are now. My children needed to learn that love cannot be bought or demanded, it must be earned and tended and cherished. I needed to learn that my worth isn't determined by what I can provide for others, but by who I am as a person. We are not the same family we were a year ago. We're smaller in some ways, the easy assumptions and unexamined dynamics are gone. But we're stronger too, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that we never had before. The money Harold left me was substantial, but it wasn't the real gift he gave me. The real gift was the opportunity to discover who I could become when I stopped accepting less than I deserved. Today I woke up in my new apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, with a view of Central Park and sunlight streaming through windows that don't need repair. I made coffee in a kitchen equipped with appliances I chose myself, and I planned a day filled with activities that bring me joy. At 74 years old, I'm finally living the life I want rather than the life others expect of me. I'm finally the person Harold always said I could be, if only I was brave enough to try. And I am brave enough. It just took me 7 decades to figure that out. This afternoon, Rachel is taking me to see a Broadway show, not because she needs something from me, but because she knows I love theater and she enjoys my company. Tomorrow, Tony and I are having lunch to discuss his cases involving elder abuse. This weekend, Emma is visiting from Boston where she started graduate school, and Jake is coming up from Princeton for our monthly family dinner. We'll sit around my dining room table, sharing stories and laughter and the kind of easy affection that can only exist between people who have chosen to love each other despite their flaws and failures. We'll be a family again, but a better family this time. A family built on truth instead of assumptions, on respect instead of obligation, on genuine care instead of financial dependency. And when the evening ends and my children return to their own lives, I won't feel abandoned or forgotten. I'll feel grateful for their love, for my independence, and for the long, winding journey that brought us all home to each other. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the people closest to you made you question your own worth? Where you had to choose between keeping peace and demanding respect? Your story matters, and I'd love to hear about your own journey to discovering your strength. If this story touched something in your heart, please give it a like and subscribe. These conversations about dignity, respect, and finding our courage later in life are ones we need to keep having. Share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself.